It began on a Tuesday, with a cream-colored envelope that smelled faintly of money and disrespect. I didn't need to see the sender. The handwriting razor-perfect loops and blades of ink belonged to my sister. She addressed me like a stranger. Ms. Lucy Hanson. Not Lucy. Not big sis. Formal. Sterile. Like a bank notice. I stood in my tiny kitchen, with the sun sharpening through the blinds, and felt the coffee cool in my hands. I should have tossed it. I should have known that cardstock thick enough to stop a bullet would carry something worse than bad news. But some naive part of me still wanted to believe. The girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares still lived inside Alyssa buried. Perhaps, under diamonds and spite, I broke the seal. It wasn't to save the date. It wasn't even an announcement. It was a bill, wedding planning fees, venue retainer, custom linens, imported candles, photographer deposit, honeymoon, 3 weeks in Tuscany, total due, $80. Ling ling ling. Pay within 30 days, below the total. In Alyssa's immaculate script. Considering all you've done for me, you should be honored to contribute. This is the bare minimum of your duty. I read it 3 times. The meaning didn't shift. I wasn't invited. I wasn't consulted. I was an ATM with grief still drying on the screen. 3 years after losing my husband Victor and clawing out of debt dollar by dollar, I had built myself a small sanctuary, a 1-bedroom apartment with chipped tiles and a stubborn window that stuck in winter. The envelope turned that sanctuary back into rubble. My hand shook. The coffee cup slipped, shattered against the floor. I knelt, gathering white porcelain like bones, and felt something colder than sadness settle in my chest. Not devastation, not even shock. Clarity. I stood, caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, and met a woman I barely recognized. No makeup. No pretenses. Just steady eyes and a jaw set like a lock. For 38 years I'd worn the costume Alyssa preferred. Dutiful. Forgiving. Endlessly available. Today I took it off. I opened my laptop. Not to transfer funds. Not to beg entry. To study. Riverside Manor. October Saturdays were highway robbery expensive. I pulled rates. Supplier list. Vendor policiers. The honeymoon villa. Villa Alante. I cross-checked with travel forums and photo tags. The private chef and infinity pool. Upcharge alone. Could pay my rent. For a year. Every detail Alyssa had curated to impress people who'd forget her name by New Year's. I mapped it, like a general surveying a battlefield. By sunset, I had a spreadsheet, a call list, and a plan. The first number was the wedding planner, Kelly Simpson. White Plains. I called. Simpson Wedding Planning. This is Kelly. La. Hi. Kelly. This is Lucy, Alyssa's sister. La. A smile warmed through the phone. Wonderful. Alyssa mentioned you might be covering the wedding costs. We're creating something truly beautiful. La. I'm sure you are. I said, keeping my voice flat calm. Can we meet tomorrow at 2? A tiny beat. Of course. La. I set the phone down and opened the bottle of good wine, the one I kept for anniversaries I no longer celebrated. I didn't toss love. I toasted boundaries, because the truth was simple. Alyssa's dream day ran on a single assumption, that I would keep being who I used to be. The sister who paid, apologized, and vanished before photos. The sister whose grief and small life were embarrassing, whose bank account was not. The next morning, I chose my armor, a navy sheath dress that used to be 2 weeks of groceries, and our mother's pearls, softly luminous, properly severe, not to pretend wealth, to project the quiet competence of someone who could write an $80,000 check, and wouldn't. Kelly's office looked like a lifestyle spread cream walls, gold accents, a glass desk reflecting my resolve begged me. She welcomed me with that polished warmth people develop when they live on retainer. Your sister has exquisite taste. Riverside Manor in October. Hand-blown glass. Italia linens. Everything is exquisite. When's the date? I asked. October 15. 3 weeks away. Her smile twitched. Alyssa said you might be traveling and unable to attend. I set the courtesy water down. There seems to be confusion, I said evenly. I was never invited, and I never agreed to pay. The mask slipped. Oh, Alyssa told me you'd be contributing about 80,000. Since you couldn't be there. I slid the invoice across the glass. This arrived yesterday. Kelly scanned it. Color draining. I watched the calculations flicker behind her eyes. Her deposit. Vendor de balances. Reputational risk. When she spoke, her voice was smaller. Without that payment, nothing proceeds. Venue. Caterer. Flowers. Photography. None of it. Then we're aligned? I said, standing. Please tell Alyssa exactly that. And give her my number. If she wants anything from me, she can call. Not invoice. Oh, outside. October air soared through my lungs, like clean truth. I texted an old neighbor for her daughter. Jessica's number. A girl Alyssa had discarded for being unsophisticated. Now, a wedding photographer, with a spine of steel. If Alyssa wanted a contribution, she'd get one, the kind you remember. Kelly Simpson's suite smelled faintly of peonies and money. I sat across from her glass desk, like we were negotiating a merger. She presented a curated dream, Riverside Manor's riverlit terrace. Imported linens, custom stemware, a string quartet, sworn to play, modern but tasteful. I let her finish the pitch. Then asked the only question that mattered. Who signed the contracts? She blinked. Alyssa and Ben. But she assured me you were covering certain items, roughly 80,000 since you couldn't attend. Assured you. I repeated, sliding the cream-colored invoice across the glass like a warrant. No invitation. No agreement. Just this. Kelly read, swallowed, and set it down with 2 careful fingers. Under the makeup and the event planner poise, I watched a professional do math in real time. Deposits out. Balance pending. Vendors owed. Reputation on the line. To be clear, I said, if payment doesn't arrive, nothing happens. Her voice lost its gloss. Correct. The venue requires funds in advance. Catering to. Florist. Photographer. Everyone. Without payment. There is no wedding. We held the truth between us. A crystal thing that could cut if you touched it wrong. Then here's what I need. I said, standing, if Alyssa calls, and she will tell her precisely that. Give her my number. Any conversation goes through me. Not your assumptions. She nodded. Pale and professional. Understood. Back on the street. October. Bit clean through my coat. I called Gina Smith, our old neighbor, who answered, like warmth, poured through a phone line. Within minutes, she texted me her daughter's number, Jessica, the same girl Alyssa had jettisoned in high school for being insufficiently polished. We met at a cafe in Terrytown. Half nostalgia, half new ground. She looked like competence wrapped in kindness, camera bag by her boots. Eyes that see stories before they happen. Lucy, she said, hugging me like no time had passed. Mum said you might have work. Not the kind you post on Instagram. I slid the invoice across the table. She read, her jaw tightening by increments. $80,000 for a sister who's not invited. She said quietly, that's not wedding planning. That's financial abuse with flowers. Ugh. Riverside Manor. 3 weeks. I said, there are public vantage points. I need documentation from outside the property. Guests arriving. Vendors. Leaving. Any case if funds don't clear. Not to humiliate her. To protect me, if she starts rewriting history. Jessica nodded, slowly. I've shot there. There are 2 park overlooks, and a river path with clear angles into the garden. As long as I stay off private grounds. It's legal. She tapped her phone. I'll block off the date. And before then, let me teach you how to paper the truth. Call. Recording laws. Timestamped notes. Email confirmations. You don't fight entitlement with feelings. You fight it with records. We planned like adults who had survived the same kind of girl in different bodies. She showed me a simple evidence log. Date. Time. Caller. Summary. Next action. She set me up with an app that auto-transcribes voicemails. By the time the coffee went cold, I had a playbook. On the drive home, my phone chimed. A text from Kelly Simpson. Thank you for your candor. Per your request. I've informed Alyssa that without immediate payment, services will pause. I provided your number. I replied with a single line. Appreciated. That evening, the calls began. First, Ben Alyssa's fiancé, wearing a polite lawyer's tone that frayed at the edges. Lucy, there's been some confusion about disbursements. Give me a ring. I didn't. 20 minutes later. Lucy, this is getting urgent. Vendors are asking questions. Oh? Still no. Let the questions multiply in the correct direction. By day 3, the mask slipped. Lucy. Alyssa snapped on voicemail. Sugar. Crystallizing. Into glass. Kelly says you're reneging. The wedding is in 2 weeks. This is my once-in-a-lifetime day. Be an adult. Oh, I replayed it twice. Then added it to the log. Tone. Entitlement. Ask. $80 kelvins. Leverage. Family. And once-in-a-lifetime. Response. None. Jessica called from a sunrise shoot near Riverside Manor. 2 vans pulled out of the service road after 5 minutes. Looked like vendors told to hold until payment clears. Also Sandra from our old block. She's on the catering staff. Word is Alyssa's been difficult. And they're at $0 paid. Oh, then the grown-up thing, I said, is for the grown-ups who ordered the wedding to pay for it. Oh. Silence hummed between us. An agreement more solid than paper. That night, I made myself a real dinner and ate it at a real table. No plastic fork. No standing at the sink. I set the invoice beside my plate like a trophy from a battle I had finally chosen to fight on my terms. And I slept deeply, dreamlessly, in a life I owned outright. By the end of that week, my voicemail looked like a legal archive of desperation. Ben's tone shifted from professional calm to strained panic. Lucy, this is ridiculous. Alyssa is losing her mind. The vendors are demanding immediate payment. Please call back. Alyssa's messages came sharper. More cutting. You're ruining my wedding out of spite. This is my once-in-a-lifetime day. And you can't let your pettiness destroy it. Each call had the same undertone. Not love. Not reconciliation. Just demand. My log grew thick with transcripts and timestamps. Every word made their entitlement clearer. On the 4th day, Alyssa finally caught me on the phone. I answered. Speaker on. Jessica, recording with a second device. Lucy. What are you doing? Her voice was a brittle whisper over static. The planner says you're breaking your promise. I never made a promise. Alyssa. This is my wedding. You're my sister. You should be honored to contribute. Do you really want me to be humiliated in front of Ben's family because of your grudges? I stared at the phone, like it was a theatre screen. So, let me get this straight. You exclude me from your guest list because I don't fit your image. But you still expect me to finance the entire show? You twist everything, she snapped. I thought if you contributed financially instead of attending, it would be easier for everyone. Easier for you, I said evenly. Silence stretched long enough for me to hear her breathing. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted back to that familiar pleading note. I know the invoice sounded cold. I was stressed. I didn't mean it that way. But you're my sister. Don't you want to see me happy? I closed my eyes, remembering the child who once clung to me during thunderstorms. But that child was gone. I want to see you kind, I said quietly. I want to see you treat people like humans, not credit cards. Until then, my answer is no. Her voice cracked into fury. You'll regret this. Everyone will blame you. Then everyone will finally be right about one thing. I replied and hung up. That night, Jessica called from the catering kitchen. Sandra, the same widow who used to trade coffee with me after Victor died, had confirmed Alyssa's behavior. She screams at the staff. She's changed the menu 3 times, and she hasn't paid a dime. Lucy, the whole catering team, knows she told them you were covering it. I laughed. For the first time in weeks. It wasn't bitter. It was real. From the gut. Then when dinner doesn't arrive, the truth will sit at every table. And Jessica posed. Do you think you're being cruel? Her words caught me off guard. Some small part of me still feared I was the villain. Maybe. I admitted. Maybe this is too much. And no, Jessica said firmly. Cruel would be crashing the ceremony, broadcasting the invoice online, destroying her socially. You're not doing any of that. You're just refusing to be used. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're survival. Oh, her certainty steadied me. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I set the table with real dishes, cooked myself a proper meal, and lit a candle. Not for romance, for dignity. As I ate, I thought about all the dinners I had made for Alyssa over the years. All the times I had fed her, soothed her, sacrificed for her. And now, for the first time, I was feeding only myself, and it was enough. When the dishes were drying and the kitchen smelled of roasted garlic, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Alyssa. No voicemail, just a raw scream when I picked up. My wedding is in 8 days, and you've destroyed everything. I set the phone down on the counter, her voice still echoing. For once, it didn't pierce me. It just confirmed the truth. I wasn't her sister anymore. I was her scapegoat, who had finally walked off stage. And without me, the entire performance was collapsing. 8 days before the wedding, Alyssa's voice cracked through my phone, sharp with panic. My vendors are walking. The caterer wants 12 grand in cash. The florist pulled arrangements back into the truck. The photographer says he won't even show without his fee up front. Lucy, you have to fix this. Fix. That was always the word. For 30 years, I had fixed everything. Broken curfews, unpaid rent, sudden crises. I was her emergency fund in human form. But now, I just listened, silent, letting her words crumble under their own weight. What does this have to do with me? I finally asked. Calm as stone, Ben's voice came on next. Strained and angry. Drop the act. You know exactly what this has to do with you. Just because you weren't invited doesn't mean you needed to sabotage everything. Hell, I almost laughed. I didn't sabotage a thing. I just didn't pay. That's not the same. For Alyssa, it was. The result is the same, she screamed. Do you know what this is costing me? My reputation. Ben's family. Our friends, everyone's asking why this is collapsing. The irony was bitter and perfect. She had gambled her entire future on a silent assumption that I would fold under pressure, like always. Now the house of cards was caving in. That evening, Jessica texted, "The venue staff are panicking. Guests are arriving early. Confused. Vendors are packing vans." I've got it all on camera. I stared at the message, imagining Alyssa's perfect facade, unraveling like silk catching fire. For years, she'd built her life on appearances, social ladders, curated friendships, gold-edged stationery. Now, every unpaid invoice was a spotlight, revealing the cracks. The morning of October 15th arrived grey and wet. I brewed tea and sorted my bills, my own modest life. Organized. Intact. 17 missed calls blinked on my phone. Ben. Alyssa. The planner. Even numbers I didn't recognize. I silenced them all. By noon, Jessica called. "Lucy, you won't believe this." The caterers walked out. The florist stripped the hall. Guests are huddled in the parking lot with no clue what's happening. I got footage of everything. The panic. The whispers. Even Ben arguing with venue staff. My chest rose with something that wasn't joy. Exactly. It was release. For once, the consequences were hers alone. At 11:30, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Alyssa, hair unwashed, coat thrown over pajamas, eyes wild from crying. Ben hovered behind, jaw tight, looking like a man who had spent the night negotiating with walls. I opened the door just enough. "Lucy," she sobbed. "We need to talk." You both look upset," I said evenly. "Upset?" Alyssa's composure finally shattered. "My wedding is ruined. The caterer demanded cash we didn't have. The florist refused delivery. Guests are calling me a fraud. This is a nightmare." I folded my arms. "Sounds stressful. But what does it have to do with me?" Ben's temper snapped. "You know damn well you killed this wedding by refusing to pay." I held his glare. "No, I simply refused to be robbed. Your mistake was planning a party you couldn't afford, and betting on my silence." Alyssa's tears came in waves. Real this time. Not staged. "Please. Lucy, I know I handled it badly. But today is supposed to be my day. Can't we argue later? Can't you just help me now?" For a moment, the old instinct clawed back. Fix it. Write the check. Keep the peace. But then I remembered the invoice. Cold and clinical. Addressed to Ms. Hanson. Stripping me of family while still demanding my bank account. I took a breath. If I paid right now, what would change? After the wedding? After the honeymoon? Would you invite me back into your life? Or would I just go back to being the embarrassing sister who isn't welcome until you need more money? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence was my answer. I shook my head slowly. "You didn't just lose a wedding today. Alyssa, you lost me." I closed the door before either could respond. Their muffled voices faded down the hall, leaving only the quiet hum of my apartment, the one space in the world that was mine. Untouchable. For the first time, I felt untouchable. 2. The apartment was silent after their footsteps faded. But inside me, there was no silence, only a strange, steady calm. For years, I had braced for explosions, storms, endless demand. Now the storm had passed, and I was still standing. Jessica called within the hour. Her voice electric. "Lucy, you won't believe it. The venue just posted an announcement. Wedding cancelled. No further details." Guests were milling around, whispering, filming on their phones. I caught every moment. The florist loading vans. Waiters carrying trays back to trucks. Ben's family demanding answers. I closed my eyes, imagining it. Alyssa's perfect day, dissolving into confusion. Embarrassment. Rumor. A whole narrative, collapsing under the weight of unpaid bills and false assumptions. You got it all? I asked. Every angle. Video. Audio. Photos. You're covered, if they try to spin this as your fault. Thank you. Jessica. Truly. That evening, I allowed myself a small ritual. I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and cooked a real dinner steak and roasted vegetables. Food that required patience and care. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, while my phone buzzed and blinked, unanswered on the counter. Messages piled up. Alyssa screaming. Ben cursing. Relatives parroting the script about family duty. I ignored them all. When I finally checked the screen, one text stood out. You ruined my wedding out of spite. You'll never be part of my life again. I typed back carefully. I didn't ruin your wedding. I just didn't pay for it. The rest was your choice. Her reply came instantly. It's the same thing. And that was the final confirmation. Alyssa couldn't see the line between using someone and loving them. To her, my refusal to bankroll her spectacle was indistinguishable from sabotage. The next morning, Jessica sent over the files, hundreds of images and clips, meticulously time-stamped. Guests whispering in parking lots. Staff packing away food. The planner pacing with a phone, pressed tight against her ear. Proof. Solid and undeniable. That the collapse came from Alyssa and Ben's unpaid obligations. Not from me. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Heavy paper. Alyssa's flawless handwriting. I opened it. At the kitchen table. Braced for venom. Lucy. It began. I can never forgive you for what you did. You stole the most important day of my life. Ben's family doubts everything now. Our friends are confused. I turned to you because I trusted you. And you betrayed me. From this day forward, you are dead to me. The letter trembled in my hands, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. For decades, being cut out of Alyssa's life had been my deepest fear. Now, as the words stared back at me, all I felt was relief. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer with the invoice. 2 artifacts of the same truth. I had finally stopped paying the toll to remain in someone else's story. In the weeks that followed, my apartment grew warmer. Herbs sprouted on the windowsill, their green scent chasing away old ghosts. New photos lined the walls, children from refugee camps. I was helping through my non-profit work. Their smiles reminded me that my worth wasn't measured in how much I could fund someone else's fantasy. And then came one final envelope. This time, from a law firm. I opened it to find divorce filings. Alyssa and Ben hadn't survived the fallout. Their relationship, built on appearances and assumptions, had collapsed like the wedding itself. I set the papers aside, brewed tea, and let the steam rise into the quiet. For once, the story wasn't about Alyssa's choices or her chaos. It was about me standing on my own, steady, no longer an accessory in someone else's narrative. Spring arrived like a quiet promise. Sunlight slid across my windowsill, where basil and rosemary grew in chipped mugs, filling the apartment with the smell of new beginnings. I walked barefoot across the creaky floorboards and realized this space no longer felt small. It felt like mine, finally unshadowed by Alyssa's demands or Ben's disdain. The divorce papers sat tucked away in my desk drawer, but I rarely thought about them. They weren't my burden to carry. They were simply proof that everything Alyssa built on entitlement had collapsed under its own weight. She had gambled her future on my silence, and lost. Jessica visited, one Saturday, dropping her camera bag by the door. She handed me a stack of glossy prints images from the cancelled wedding day. Guests wandering confused in the parking lot. Caterers packing vans. Alyssa shouting into her phone with mascara streaks down her cheeks. Proof carved into photographs. I thought you'd want the originals. Jessica said gently. I flipped through them, one by one, and felt no sting. No guilt. Only closure. Thank you, I said, sliding them back into the envelope. But I don't think I'll ever need them. I already know the truth. She smiled. Keep them anyway. A reminder that you chose yourself. Later that evening, I sat at my desk with a blank notebook. For years, my life had been organized around other people's expectations. Alyssa's dreams, my parents' pressures, Victor's illness before he died. Always fixing, always giving. Now the page was clear, untouched, waiting for my handwriting. I wrote the first line, "My life belongs to me." The sentence looked almost strange on the page. But it was real. And it was enough. The phone still buzzed. Sometimes numbers I didn't recognize. Relatives I no longer claimed. I stopped answering. Family, I had learned, wasn't blood that demanded sacrifice. Family was the people who respected your boundaries, who celebrated your presence, instead of exploiting your wallet. By that definition, I already had family. Jessica, who stood by me. Sandra, who whispered the truth. Even the children overseas, whose smiles were more genuine than any letter Alyssa had ever written. Weeks turned into months. My non-profit projects grew. I was flying again. Not running from grief, but running toward purpose. Schools in refugee camps opened their doors wider. Donations increased. I was using my energy not to prop up a sister's illusions, but to build something lasting. One evening, after a long day, drafting proposals, I sat by the window with tea in hand. The city hummed below, alive and indifferent. I thought back to the cream-coloured envelope that started everything the bill disguised as family duty and realised it was the best letter I'd ever received. Because it forced me to draw the line. I'd been afraid to draw my entire life. That line saved me. I would never again apologise for saying no. I would never again pay for the privilege of being excluded. And I would never again confuse exploitation with love. The last text I ever got from Alyssa's number came months later. Just 3 words. I need you. I deleted it without reading further. Because I had already learned the lesson. She didn't need me. She needed my compliance. My money. My silence. And those were things I no longer gave. Instead, I chose myself. I set down my tea, opened my notebook again, and wrote the second line beneath the first. And I am finally free.